Hello. Okay. So thank you very much for having me to give this talk. Actually, I gave part of this talk, a large part of this talk, 2 years ago or 2 years ago. I think you invited me to give a keynote at ISMB at iRNA COSI 2021. I think, but we have a lot more updates since then in this paper, and now it's published in Nature. In Nature just a few months ago. So we're talking about mRNA design. So this whole story happened just right at the beginning of the COVID. So in January of 2020, I was at the peak of the COVID in Wuhan, China. I was thinking, how can my research help fight the pandemic kind of more directly? I knew that then that linear code, which I published in ISMB, this COSI 4 years ago, could have direct impact, like predicting the genome structure. But I want to have some even more direct impact that to kind of directly cure the disease or do vaccines or whatever. So I asked my friend Riju Das from Stanford, who is a longtime user of my software linear code linear question before the pandemic. I asked him how can our work help to do anything with the nCoV, which is the old name back then. And he said, maybe consider RNA vaccine. But I did not know anything about RNA vaccine or anything about vaccine at that time. I'm a computer scientist. But he said, oh, I got a great idea. So come to Stanford and we'll talk. And then I went there and gave me a 2-hour lecture what RNA vaccine is and then what's this important problem that we were facing back in January of 2020. So it turns out to be that mRNA design for stability is an important problem that we worked on since then, and so that's how we got to here. So which is basically generalizing the single sequence folding to lattices, which is another kind of a technique borrowed from computational linguistics, which is my original area. Okay, so very briefly, so mRNA vaccine, as we all know, is much better than the traditional protein vaccine. It made a huge impact in this COVID, but it has a major problem. That is, its stability, chemical stability is relatively low compared to proteins and DNAs. So how, if because RNAs are largely single-stranded and can easily be degraded before entering your cell or after entering your cell, and if it's degraded, if it's cut down any place in the sequence, then it cannot produce this full-length spike protein that you wanted, and as a result, you got less immune response. So you got less protection from the vaccine. So our goal is to design more computationally design more stable and efficient mRNA vaccine sequences. But how do you do that? Well, first, the design problem. So as we all know, the translation problem is easy. It's kind of deterministic from mRNA to protein. But in the inverse direction of design, it's not deterministic because each amino acid, like Vadian, like leucine, can be translated by multiple triplet codons. So this is known as the redundancy of the genetic code. So because there are 64 triplet codons, but only like 20 or 21 amino acids. So each amino acid naturally have multiple choices, and you can use any one of them. So and you multiply the number of choices together, you got a humongous number. You got an exponentially large number, and they are all synonymous. They are all translated to the spike protein that you wanted. But which one do you want the best? Well, Moderna actually published a paper right before the pandemic in December of 2019, showing that you want the most stable mRNA over this huge kind of ocean of candidates. The one that has the least free energy, in other words. So how do you do that? How do you search in that space? Well, you cannot enumerate each one by one. That will take you billions and billions of years. You cannot even finish until the universe at the end of the universe. So Riju thought it was going to be hard. There's no hope. So he wanted to do something cross-sourcing plus my linear code, and so he started this open vaccine initiative. But in his office, I said maybe there's hope. Maybe we could do something maybe like efficiently like using dynamic programming. He did not believe in me, so I went on to work on it myself for a few weeks, and I realized later that we can borrow something from my old field, computer linguistics, and to solve it very efficiently. So the first idea I borrowed from linguistics is something called word lattice, which is kind of just the DFA, direct finite state, deterministic finite state automaton, which is kind of a theoretic graph with labels on each edge. So you can kind of pack this kind of design space into this DFA. So let's say 2 choices for threonine and 6 choices for leucine, and so on and so forth. We got a little theoretic circuit graph. So this graph contains or compactly encodes the exponentially many alternatives. Each path from the beginning to the end is a valid mRNA sequence that encode the protein that you wanted. But the big question that we did not solve yet is how do you find the most stable, or in other words, lowest free energy path sequence or path in the stats. So here comes the key second idea from linguistics, that is lattice parsing. So in computer linguistics, when you do speech recognition, at least in the old days, not in the modern days, you cannot kind of recognize the word in isolation of context, say be or meal or like or alike. But with context, you can use language models. You can say, oh, syntax-wise, you can say, oh, in terms of grammaticality or likelihood, I think I like this meal is more likely than any other sequence, and it's the most grammatical structure for that most likely sequence. So this is called lattice parsing, which does not enumerate any sequence, but it just jointly folds or parses all the sentences together, exponentially many sequences together in polynomial time. So we just use the same idea, except that we changed the English grammar into RNA folding grammar, which encodes stability or free energy. And then, of course, the input is the mRNA lattice that we just encoded. And using the same algorithm, which we invented back in 1961, 60 years before the pandemic, it was the exact same algorithm, just changed the input and grammar. And you got you got the optimal mRNA sequence with the lowest free energy, that is most stability. And that's also its optimal secondary structure. So it does it simultaneously, it doesn't enumerate anything. So this is so efficient that it can do the design for a spike protein in just 11 minutes. So here's a contrast between the wild type, which is the sequencing the virus for the spike protein, and our design sequence. You can see on the left that the wild type is very unstable because it has a lot of single-stranded regions in red. Those single-stranded regions can be cut down or degraded so that you no longer have a full sequence. Whereas on the right, you have a sequence which is largely double-stranded, and so you have a very different secondary structure. So these are all the kind of bluish region are double-stranded. So in other words, you kind of made an RNA sequence more like a DNA. So and DNAs are double-stranded, so it's rather hard to cut down into pieces. And when our algorithm was kind of uploaded to preprint server archive in April of 2020, a lot of pharmaceutical companies noticed that, and one of them, Standard RNA in Shanghai, China, was the leading company on mRNA therapeutics. So in China, they volunteered to do this experimental verification for us, both in vitro and in vivo, and they showed that our design vaccines can lead up to more than 100-fold increase in antibody response over standard methods of codon optimization used by like BioNTech and Moderna and all the other companies in the industry. Significantly better. So here's the kind of rough idea. So we have actually two optimization directions. One is stability, or the lower the better in terms of free energy, because in physics, the more lower, the more negative the free energy means the better, more stable. But on the y-axis is the translation efficiency indexed by the codon adaptation index. This is related to something called codon usage, because as I said, each amino acid has multiple codons, like leucine has 6 different codons, but they're not all the same, because in a human genome, they prefer GC-rich codons, like CUG is best for leucine, and CUA is not preferred, so they have distribution for each codon. So we would prefer to use frequent codons over rare codons, because that would increase, using frequent codons would increase the translation efficiency, because those tRNAs are easier to find in cells, so you can easily grab those corresponding tRNAs and make the translation faster. So in other words, on the x-axis is kind of more like half-life, or how long can your mRNA stay. But on the y-axis is like how much protein, roughly speaking, you can produce in a given amount of time. So you want both directions to be good. So if you only care about stability, you got this point. If you only care about codon optimization, you got this point. There's a trade-off between the two. And codon optimization, the traditional technique before our work, used by everybody in the industry, is just a local search method that prefers frequent codons. For example, the Pfizer sequence, the Moderna sequence, our baseline, and CureVac as well. So as a result, so you only optimize codon usage, but because human genome prefers G-rich codons, you have a slight byproduct that you would also improve stability just a little bit. But these two directions are largely orthogonal. So our work can totally improve the stability all the way to the extreme, to the most extreme case, and we can prove that our algorithm is optimal because it's done in a programming base. Okay, so yeah, LinearDesign lets you explore the previously in vitro area of highly stable and efficient designs. And here's the in vitro and in vivo experimental results from seminar. So because I'm not an experimentalist, I'll just say that in both the gel run, in all of these experiments, gel run, half-life, protein expression, this is binding activity response, neutralizing activity response, and cell response, they're all much better than the baseline, which is co-optimized very close to the BioNTech sequence. Especially in terms of half-life, we improved for up to 5-fold, protein expression 3-fold, and antibody more than 100-fold, and 20-fold for neutralizing. It's great. So one of the reviewers for the Nature paper suggested that asked us to do a very kind of rigorous comparison with the BioNTech final sequence, which is the most common sequence on product on the market. So we did a head-to-head comparison with that sequence, which is very close to our baseline in this grid, in this MFE CI grid. It turns out that it is the case that in terms of half-life, it's very close to our baseline. That means our thermodynamics parameters are very accurate. So this is, of course, not our work. This is our collaborator, David Matthews, and his advisor, Turner's work. So everybody has been using those parameters for all these years. They are very accurate in modeling both thermodynamic and chemical stability. But in terms of protein expression and antibody, they are actually quite a bit better than our baseline sequence H. But still, our design C is significantly better in all areas like protein antibody response and protein expression. So we are still better significantly than the BioNTech final sequence. And also the editor suggested that we need to do another experiment on one more vaccine because this is a general purpose algorithm. It should work for any therapeutic targets like vaccines or whatever proteins. So you should show something more than COVID. So we did it on VZV, varicella zoster virus, which also worked very well. So let me just briefly summarize. So this is published on Nature as an accelerated article preview. So this is only for those very rare articles with very important kind of public health importance, like applicable to. And then I'll just quote one sentence from the reviewer that it should be disseminated immediately so that mRNA developers in the industry can use it. So we released our code on GitHub for free academic use, and we founded a company to serve industry. So it's already used by a lot of companies, and Sanofi, which is one of the top 10 pharmaceuticals, it's actually a French company, and it's actually has its roots in Pasteur, and I'm speaking the Pasteur launch, Louis Pasteur, so quite on the, they licensed it 2 years ago. Okay, so yeah, it can also be used for therapeutics, not just for vaccines, because mRNA therapeutics is really the future of medicine. So you can use mRNAs for like CAR T, for cancer, for anything. So there are a couple of universities working with us on this end. And I think in terms of the use case, the mRNA therapeutics is kind of 100 times bigger than mRNA vaccine. So we are very excited about that future. And I'll just briefly mention that Riju later on was convinced that we are right, and he began to start to adopt our approach, and he already published 3 papers on Nature, Communications, and others using our design. And he independently confirmed that LinearDesign it can improve on stability and protein expression, just like similar to our results. So one more application from language to biology, if I have time. Do I have time? Okay, sure, yeah. So that's the last slide. So we talked about linear fold and linear parsing, both are published in ISMB before the pandemic. But lattice parsing is what we talked about today. And there's one more thing called synchronous parsing, which we basically is like aligning and parsing English and Japanese or English and Chinese translations, which you can adapt to RNA field, which is like synchronous folding, homologous folding, which the first speaker actually briefly mentioned, that we have, for example, Delta and Omicron, different variants of SARS-CoV-2 or the SARS-related viruses, and we can fold and align them together, which is better than folding just one sequence alone. So that we published in PNAS 2 years ago, that we have the first homologous folding algorithm that can scale to SARS-CoV-2, because this is way too long. It's 30,000 nucleotides, the longest RNA virus known today. But our algorithm is so fast that we can work on such big virus in kind of global prediction, not just like piece by piece or local prediction. Okay, so I'll just stop here, and you can read our news and try our server in code. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I wonder whether the canonical routine is considered, or whether it is the M-pseudo routine considered.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So far in this work, we considered natural unmodified RNAs, which means uridine instead of pseudouridines. But this algorithm can totally work on with pseudouridine-free energy models. So this is kind of orthogonal to chemical modification. Our computational design is complementary to and can work with chemical modification once we have those energy models. So far, we only have the natural energy models. So when we have those modified energy models, we can just plug in the same, and it should work. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. So I was confused about the theoretical complexity of the problem. So
Sure.
For the efficiency problem, is it NP-hard, or do you have an algorithm that produces an optimal solution in polynomial time? Then the second question, when you included the efficiency of translation, how did you define the objective, and what's the complexity of that?
Sure, thank you very much. The complexity is cubic, just like folding. So when we extended single sequence folding to lattice folding, it's still cubic time, but cubic not in the sequence length, but cubic in the number of nodes in the lattice. But because in this lattice, the mRNA lattice, the number of nodes is still at most 2 times the sequence length. So it's still cubic in terms of length, but actually in practice, up to like 10,000 nucleotides, the empirical complexity is more like quadratic, because our algorithms are very, very efficient. So it's quadratic. And when you integrate the second objective, which is the CAI, it's still cubic in the worst case, and quadratic in practice. So here we just introduce a hyperparameter lambda times the logarithm of CAI. So it's basically MFE plus lambda times logarithm CAI, something like that. It's written in the paper. Thank you. Yes.
Just
Sure.
a follow-up question.
Sure.
Why do you think the virus sequence is so far off from the optimal?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you, Clemens. So the virus sequence is so non-optimal, actually. So the wild type. So this is another clear evidence that this is not man-made virus, because if I were to design this virus, I would move it at least to somewhere here. It's much more efficient in translation. It can kind of copy itself and can reproduce much more efficiently. But the reason why the virus is so bad in both energy, stability and CI is because it wants to evolve faster. So that's not my answer. I asked one of the biologists, they said, oh, viruses actually prefer AU-rich codons, not GC-rich codons. Humans prefer GC-rich codons because it's more stable. But virus, it needs to kind of mutate faster. So it needs to keep more unpaired readings, like single-stranded readings, so that you don't have the double-stranded things to check for you, right? So it's not single-stranded, it's easier to mutate. Double-stranded, like more like a DNA, you have a parity check on the other side. It's harder to mutate. So it should keep a balance between stability and the chance to mutate. So that's evolution, yeah.